One Piece just did a thing, and I, man on the internet, am going to talk about it because
this is getting out of hand. Now there are two of them.
We now have two Joy People, each playing the drums of liberation with their fleshy heart kits, forming a grand symphony that may even stir the movements of a certain sinking iron giant. We'll get into all of that, but first we need to continue our world tour. And our first stop of the chapter is Alabaster, and I believe this is Yuba, the oasis town that was struck with drought where the Straw Hats met Old Man Toto, who you can see in the middle, but Koza is there as well, along with some other familiar faces that often gather around Koza, such as Child with Scarf and Man in Top Hat, who both appeared with Cobra in his From the Decks of the World check-in, where it was revealed that Cobra is now the environmental minister of Alabaster. And I thought it was really nice to take a moment to go here because Alabaster is a huge nation, one of the biggest islands we've been to in the series, and we tend to only think of it as the capital city of Alabama. But you know what I would have loved to have seen, and look, maybe there's still some time? I would love to see a cameo from Geratsu because he actually currently lives quite close to Alabaster. He fell down from the clouds thanks to a certain Straw Hat doctor, and Geratsu proceeded to build a very successful hot spring resort with Koza's Uncle Goro, which is also now incredibly relevant to the story, which is not something I expected to say of Geratsu. But in this story, thanks to the Dirt Boss, they dig a tunnel between Alabaster and the Hot Springs Island and install its own crab bus service, which I always thought was a bit too easy to do. However, it now makes perfect sense because these two islands are actually part of the same one chunk of land. It's called the Ocean Floor Bus Service, but this is not actually the ocean floor. It's the previous surface level that everyone now thinks is the seafloor. A grave misconception that will eventually be cleared up when Luffy becomes the Pirate King and does the whole Dawn of the World business. But look, we all know that Monkey D. Luffy is going to become the Pirate King, so the real question is, who's going to become the Monkey King? A question succinctly answered by the sponsor of this video, Raid Shadow Legends. But more importantly than that, this video is sponsored by Monkey. Sun Wukong, the Monkey King, has strolled into Raid, waving his unnecessarily phallic staff all up in your Raid face. Sun Wukong is one of my favorite characters in anything. He is a direct inspiration for our beloved Monkey D. Luffy, combining bizarre abilities, unique intelligence, and general shenaniganry that is going to take the Raid-verse by storm. And new players can get him by downloading the game via my link and using the code MONKEYKING within the first 72 hours of registration. Something else I love about Sun Wukong is that he's an existence that very much substitutes reality for his own, which is reflected in-game by his Staff of Wonder, which just flat out ignores 50% of your opponent's defense. He just doesn't want to deal with it, so he ignores it, and wow, it's not there. You can also win a game console, smartphone, Amazon gift cards, legendaries, and other in-game loot. After downloading Raid using my link or QR code, just go to summertavern.plarium.com, enter your Raid ID, and start searching for hidden items to prepare a refreshing potion for a champion. And you can also get a 2-month YouTube Premium subscription by downloading Raid before July 17th, playing for at least 5 days, and hitting level 20 within 3 days. And you can get bonuses available only through my link, such as a huge starter pack featuring Epic Champion Tyrell. Plus, after reaching level 25, you'll get another starter pack featuring Epic Rector Darth. And you can even come find me under the name Grand Line Review and join my clan. So mate, check out the Raid Monkey. But for now, it's back to you, me. There's also an extremely small but very fun panel showing the bounty hunting residents of Whiskey Peak listening to Vega Punk's message, where we see the power couple that is Mr. Nine and Miss Monday, as well as their child. Because apparently as soon as Vivi and Igaram left, these two said finally, ripped off their clothes and immediately set about producing spawn. And just a weird thing that no one but me cares about. A couple of years ago, Oda went on a bit of a useless information binge and started revealing the names of all the Baroque Works agents, like how Miss Golden Week is Marion, Mr. Five's name is Jem, and Mr. Four's name is Babe after Babe Ruth because of baseball and such. But he never revealed the names of Miss Monday and Mr. Nine, which annoys me on such a pedantic level that my only recourse is to express my displeasure through a YouTube video on the internet. And we're also treated to another visit to Dressrosa, where Leo is hilariously buying into the idea that Luffy Land might be the bad guy here after all. It's a pretty funny rule of threes gag, where we see the citizens of Alabaster and Whiskey Peak each coming to the conclusion that Luffy's the bad guy. But then right next to them, you've got people who actually know Luffy and they're not believing it. And then you cut to Dressrosa, and the subversion is that it's now Luffy's ally that's accusing him. It's pretty perfect because gullibility is the whole gag of the Tontatta tribe, especially Leo. Hence why Usopp was able to pass himself off as their hero. However, I think this is quite a clever use of Leo, because he's not the only gullible one right now, and I think his reaction very much reflects a huge chunk Punk of the world who are putting 2 and 2 together and coming to the mathematical conclusion that, hey, Luffy's probably the bad guy here, because last they heard he'd taken Vegapunk hostage and barricaded himself on Egghead Island. Then the next thing they hear, Vegapunk is dead and his final will has been triggered. So the most likely answer with those 2 pieces of information is that Luffy killed his hostage. And not only that, but also found a way to stop the broadcast because of evil pirate reasons. And it's important to note that this broadcast, as suspected, hasn't officially ended yet, and in between cuts, Vegapunk's words are still plodding along, at this stage talking about a certain name. And just an update for those of you who don't read the official translation, the end of Vegapunk's speech in the last chapter was translated as, "To those scattered throughout the world who bear the name of D, within you there is a..." And if in this chapter Vegapunk is continuing what he was saying and speaking about the who's or what's the name is, then he's probably revealing some colossal information right now that no one's getting to hear. For example, the theory that I find most interesting is the idea that Vegapunk was saying within you there is a traitor and their name is the Marshals or the Roxas or something along those lines. The other direction would be that within you there is a Joy Boy and their name was Monkeys, but I'm not quite sure how Vegapunk would have come to that specific conclusion. And also the end of the chapter very much brings into question whether or not there is a singular Joy Boy, which we'll get to because wow. But to linger on Luffy's global impression a bit, it feels like we're about to enter a very polarizing era for in-world Luffy-based opinions. Because the world government are probably going to be working overtime to portray him as a Rocksteady Zebek-style entity, someone so evil that he threatens to destabilize the entire planet, and hey, they might even take advantage of Vegapunk's message and claim that Luffy is the one causing or the one who wants to cause more of those bad floods. But then on the other side, you'll have those who recognize Luffy as the sun god Nika, as the Joy Boy, etc., but they will probably be a minority of people who have actually met Luffy. Because the general idea with tension in stories like these is to use the always darkest before dawn method. Things have to get unbelievably bad before they start to get better. And so I do think that Egghead Island may result in a record disapproval rating for our future Pirate King, and having briefly brought Rocks up, this is another one of those times where I'm genuinely wondering if he's as bad as everyone says he was. Because right now, that's sort of what's happening with Luffy. A lot of people are now in the camp of Luffy being a global terrorist, what with all of his Vegapunk assassinating. And speaking of punkicide, there's a curious page featuring York speaking to the 5 elders and asking for a satellite update, to which York replies that apart from her, there are only 2 Vegapunks left that she can detect, being Lilith and Atlas. And that took me by surprise, because what about Edison? Does this mean that we've missed the death of Edison? Or is something more interesting happening here? The last time we saw Edison was very recently in chapter 1116, and yeah, he's not in amazing shape, but he was far from dead, and nothing too crazy has happened since then, because that was after Ethan sliced through the lava phase. But York does specify that she's only tracking the Vegapunks that are still accessing punk records, which means that our boy Edison may have gone offline. Whether that means death or whether that means he's got something sneaky brewing over there, like when York disconnected to put all of her plans together. The reason why I'm not entirely certain is because after Wano, we do know that Oda is capable of killing secondary characters without much of a fuss, like Gizo and Ashura Doji, whose deaths we found out about after the raid. So will Edison die? It seems likely, but is he dead right now? I'd find it pretty underwhelming if so. Although it would bring to fruition the kind of sad reality that all of the good aspects of Vegapunk have now disappeared from the world, and all we're left with are Lilith, Atlas, and York, also known as evil, violence, and greed. We do, however, get some interesting information regarding Punk Records itself, which is the fact that it will continue to grow and gather knowledge even if Stella is dead, which is one of the most unique Devil Fruit situations we've ever encountered. A host dying, but the abilities are lingering on. And the idea here is to have sole discretion over this information by controlling York and removing all other access to Punk Records. So I think we definitely need one good Vegapunk to survive, or one bad Vegapunk who is good to survive. And right now I have to say that Atlas is looking like she's in the best spot for that. She's currently poised to escape with the giant warrior pirates, along with Stella's corpse. And she's also protected by a whole crew of giants, 1 Frankie, 1 Sanji, and 2 Joy people. Whereas Lilith feels a bit more vulnerable at the moment. Yeah, she has a huge chunk of Straw Hats with her, but they're the more underpowered part of the crew, featuring Zoro, who isn't in great shape, and I think that Jinbei would have to pull off some amazing throws to keep the Elder Stars away from her. And I'm not really sure what this part of the crew would do if a full complement of Elders came running their way. Although I should say it is very much possible that both Lilith and Atlas could escape, but given that the Elders have now switched priority to eliminating them both, I feel like they each have a 50-50 chance of survival at best. But something that made me insanely happy about this chapter was Luffy finally getting getting to hop aboard the giant ship. Because he's wasting no time. We're still on Egghead Island, but the Elbaf journey has already begun. And it makes sense because this ship is kind of like a mini island to him. And I love that he of course goes straight to the kitchen and we see him munching that giant meat. And even the chef is shocked that Luffy eats a lot. The captain's warned him, but he was not ready for this, which I think is a pretty big compliment for such a tiny man. This scene is a preview of things to come. I really cannot wait for Elbaf, but there is so much happening right here that I don't want to leave yet, but I do think that departure is imminent. Something else I really loved about this section was seeing Bonnie's powers used on Bluegrass and Dole, especially Dole because, mate, she is furious. And it is a huge credit to Bonnie that she can make these abilities work on Vice Admiral level Marines, because theoretically they have the haki to block this sort of shenaniganry. Although the best part was that Bonnie also de-aged the sea beast, and now it's a cute little giraffe mech that I love dearly and I very much wish to remain in this form. Alright, so let's talk about the big and from what I gather potentially controversial development, that being Jewelry Bonnie ending this chapter entering Gear 5th and becoming a distorted future sun god alongside Luffy. And I'll start with my personal feelings, which is that I love it. I don't know if I'm in the minority here because I've seen a lot of backlash to this online, but that might just be the vocal minority. But at the moment, all I know is that to me, this could not be more perfect. Ever since we first discovered the true potential of Jewelry Bonnie's Devil Fruit, I and so many others have been saying that, hey, since she's now seen Luffy activated, she could probably use Gear 5th as well, because the Sun God Nika is now a tangible concept to her imagination. And I was so certain of this that I have several pre-prepared art assets because it just felt like the direction that we were eventually going to head towards. But foreshadowing doesn't necessarily equal good, so here's the reason why I really love it. It's because this is the ray of hope we needed in an arc so packed with darkness. Egghead Island has been an incredibly brutal One Piece experience, and the tragedy of Bartholomew Kuma is something that will potentially reign as the most hard-hitting flashback in the series, because I just don't know if I see Oda topping this, and if he does, then I feel genuinely terrible for the character that gets inflicted on. But this is the culmination of everything Kuma, Ginny, and Bonnie. Kuma's arc was one of confinement. He lived his entire life never truly knowing what it was to be free. Whether that be literal slavery at the hands of the world nobles or effective slavery like when he joined the Seven Warlords. And in the latter part of his life, Kuma endured all of this to pursue the dream of freedom. Not for himself, but for his daughter, for Ginny's daughter, who very much followed Kuma's life of confinement in a much more literal way, with her disease preventing her from seeing the sunlight. And even Bonnie's mother Ginny was subject to slavery, as were Kuma's parents. So what we have here is an entire dynasty of people desperately craving freedom. All Bartholomew Kuma wanted was for Bonnie to be free, to finally break this cycle, because that is the promise he made to Ginny. And so long as he was given that, it didn't matter what happened to him, and now, after so long, she is finally free. As Luffy says, Gear 5th is him at his most free, and as Bonnie says, this is a form where she is completely free. And I think it's beyond appropriate that Bonnie, of all people, gets to taste that level of freedom after several generations of confinement. When people look at this Bonnie moment and get upset on Twitter or Reddit, I feel like they're only viewing this from a shonen power-up perspective. The idea that, how dare she? It took our boy Monkey D. Luffy 25 years of rigorous storytelling, hard-fought battle punching, extreme willpower training, and even being potentially killed before he was worthy of reaching this level. And now this 12-year-old girl can just do the same thing without even having fought a single eel man in a mirror world. I mean, I get it. Bonnie's Devil Fruit, look, it's broken. I've expressed concern on many occasions about just how ridiculous it is, but now I see why Oda made it that way. Originally, I reckon it was only supposed to affect aging and de-aging, but when Oda thought of the Kuma story, he changed Bonnie's powers for the sake of Bartholomew Kuma, a man who believed in two things: the joy of the sun god and the love of his daughter. To me, this is the most satisfying possible outcome because it means that Kuma and Ginny can finally rest in peace, because Kuma doesn't need to worry about Bonnie anymore. The level of freedom she's attained can never be taken away, and she will now go on to be happy and spread joy for the rest of her life, just as Kuma always strived to. I find this insanely touching. And I think the part of it might also be because the cover of Volume 109 just got released. And whenever this happens, a time-lapse is released of Oda's drawing process, which are always really cool to watch, because you get to see a ton of rejected cover designs. In this case, Oda started off with the idea of Saturn being the main focus and Kuma and Bonnie running away. But then he decided to switch that up to something more joyful. And there's a very special moment where Oda draws Kuma, then draws Bonnie, and realizes that if Bonnie's in the picture, then Kuma would be smiling. and he turns that frown into a smile and moves on. It's a very sweet artistic moment. And that's why when I read this chapter, I couldn't feel anything but happiness on behalf of a father who suffered more than any living being deserves. Suffered in order to give his daughter the power to live her life. So I'm really not at all concerned about the implications this has for the powers, scalings, and overpowered Bonniness. Although to be clear, there are big implications for this. Because if Bonnie can do this to herself, then what's to stop her transforming all of the Straw Hats into their distorted future Nika selves? That is a fun and probably necessary discussion to have for the future. But creating stringent and logical power hierarchies is not the mission of One Piece. The point of One Piece is to spread joy. And for me personally, this chapter absolutely nailed that mission. Oda also did an interview a couple of years ago that I think addresses this perfectly. It was a rare video interview, although his face was still covered by a fish. But in this interview, Oda said, "I really want to joke around more in the final saga. Even if it becomes a manga that people say, your idea is boring, it can still be entertainment for me. It'd be interesting if the topic of conversation was One Piece is in big trouble, so I'm going to enjoy it." And to me, that sounds incredibly promising, because it means that everything is only going to continue getting more and more wild from here. This is the final saga. This is the last chance for Oda to put everything he wants to page, and I am here for every opportunity he wants to take. As a side note, I feel like a lot of people overreacted very early from the tech spoilers, which neglected to mention Luffy's involvement, and so it made it sound like the Iron Giant was referring to Bonnie as Joy Boy, which is why I think people really shouldn't rate the chapter based on poorly written summaries by people who don't speak fluent English on the internet. But while we're here just on the Iron Giant, mate, what is going on? It's starting to feel like he does power up and power down depending on whenever Luffy is in Gear 5th, which he's bounced back and forth between a lot during this arc. But if there was a bit of a low moment of this chapter, it's definitely having yet another Iron Giant cliffhanger where he says another iteration of Joy Boy is here. At this point, it's a bit like Big Mom screaming wedding cake to me. I get it. I know what you want, but reading weekly, I just want to see something new from you. Although look, these are comments that are definitely not going to age well. As I think I said last week, this is going to come back to hit us in the feels at some point, especially if the Iron Giant does sink to the seafloor without ever having gotten to see Joy Boy that one last time. But I don't think that's going to happen. If anything, with Luffy and Bonnie, this may even double the power being sent into the Iron Giant, because Bonnie's heartbeat does seem to be making the sound of liberation. So hopefully this could kickstart the Iron Giant back into action to do something probably cool. But you can do something probably cool right now and hit the subscribe button for this channel, which will result in consistent injections of One Piece culture administered directly into your YouTube feed.